Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to my video game reviews. In today's video, we shall be continuing our coverage of the Kirby series with the spin-off Kirby Canvas Curse, or as it's known in the UK, Kirby Power Paint Brush, or in Japan as Touch Kabi. Whatever name you decide to use, this game was the first in the series released for the Nintendo DS. It is also the 12th spin-off overall, and the 20th game in the entire series as a whole. Utilizing the touchpad to great effect, does this game, manage to paint itself as a collection of joy, or does it succumb to the curse of mediocrity that unfortunately plagues Kirby spin-offs? Well, let us find out, starting with the development history of this game, as we always do. Alright, so this game's developmental history is actually fairly poorly documented compared to some of the others I've reviewed. While it does seem that the DS's dual screen with one having a touch ability did impact the gameplay, which we'll talk about later on in this video, it's hard to say how. Interestingly, one tidbit we got is that originally the game was meant to include more bosses such as Lolo Nalala, Dark Matter, and Nightmare, as well as Zero. Some concept art does show this and got released on the 20th anniversary encyclopedia, but these were cut for unknown reasons, and yeah, they kind of tell us, that a lot of stuff was removed, and you can kind of tell that, as I'll discuss later in the video. Some notable people who worked on this game included Satoru Wada, executive producer, Hirokuyu Jungashi, and Yoshi Tamamara, and Kuroshiki Tanabe as producers, as well as Jun Ishikawa and Tadashi Ikigami, who handled the music of this game. In the end, this game would be released on March 24th, 2005 in Japan for the DS, then on June 13th, 2005 in North America, then November 25th, 2005 in the European Union, and then April 6, 2006 in Australia. It seems to have actually performed well and was very much critically praised, with around 276,418 copies sold in Japan and a little under 130,000 copies in North America, being the best-selling game of July 2005. Now that we have sort of discussed this pre-game stuff, let us now talk about the game itself, starting with the story, and see if it has aged well. So this story begins with Kirby just sort of minding his own business, walking down, an area, when suddenly, out of nowhere, colors surround him and warp as the evil witch Drawesia draws over the land, turning the entire realm into a painting. Kirby goes to confront this maniacal painting madwoman, but is turned into a little helpless orb by the fiend's evil sorcery before he can do anything, and then she flees into the colors. All seems lost. But he notices that she left her magical paintbrush behind, and so rolls over to it, where it seemingly decides to ally itself with Kirby as a floating hand meant to represent the player, though in universe I think it's meant to be the will of the paintbrush itself. And together they go through 7 worlds with colorful names like Ready Land, Elo Adventure, Omarine Zone, Wonder Lilane, Orange Gorge, and Neo Grio. Okay, I actually found the last 2 puns to be funny. They then confront Drossia in her domain. After beating her initial form, she throws everything at him and transforms into an eldritch abomination. Drossia, which sometimes I've seen pronounced Drawwicca. I don't really know the preferred way to pronounce it. I know both are used in the fandom, but Drawwissia Soul, who then kind of establish a sort of recurring trend where the final form of final bosses becomes these sort of soul things. I guess souls are just something evil in the Kirby universe. Regardless, in the end, her soul is purged and the land is freed from her influence. And everything is just turned back to normal as a grand rainbow appears in the sky above Kirby, which is a thank you from the magic paintbrush to Kirby for his role in helping save the world. Overall, while the story was nothing groundbreaking, I still thought it was relatively engaging. Video games don't necessarily need these high stakes stories. They can just be, little good things. I think that here it was done well, and Draw Wissia really stands out from the previous bosses due to their highly unique visual presence, and plus set the groundwork for the iconic parts of many final bosses going forwards. But now let us discuss what is arguably the most important aspect of any game, the gameplay, and see how that stands up to today. Alright, so on a basic level, this spin-off's controls are radically different from your standard platformer. As Kirby is normally here just a limbless ball, and you can't really control him directly. Instead, you use the magic paintbrush, aka your stylus, to paint a line, which Kirby will then ride on, and, whatever direction they are going in. Keeping this in mind, though, there is a limit to how much paint you can utilize before you have to touch, say, a solid object or the ground for it to recover. Speaking of enemies, in order to attack enemies, you gotta tap Kirby, who will then perform a touch dash that will then kill whatever enemy, assuming they're not invulnerable. You can even tap the enemies to stun them if you're having issues hitting them. So yeah, a bit, interesting. If the enemy you dash into and defeat has a copy ability, you can get a copy ability yourself. There are a total of 11 here, 10 returning and 1 new. Starting with the returning ones, Crash functions as you expect, being a glorified screen nuke. Stone sees Kirby turn into a rock that can crush stakes into the ground or enemies. Tornado has him spin around for a bit, and if you know, are not careful, it'll go up. Wheel lets him speed forwards on the ground as a wheel. Freeze has him summon a chilly barrier around himself that will freeze any who get in his way. Burning has him become a burning meteor that can even bounce off walls and destroy any in its wake. Missile sees him become an explosive missile. Beam has you summon a beam whip that will travel around you, and you will stay in one place if you remain touched and activate the ability. Needle is cool because it allows Kirby to stick on walls or floors, as well as roll faster on the paint lines you use. Spark is kind of similar to Beam, but it's less useful as the attack is only going upwards. Sure, it can go through walls, but it's just weaker than beam due to its less large area of coverage. The only new ability, Balloon, is sadly perhaps the worst ability in the game, which is a shame as it's the first copy ability to be introduced in a spin off period. You have Kirby who will inflate like a balloon by tapping him, which will cause him to inflate and levitate. Tap him enough times and he pops, stunning enemies. While it's good at traveling far and makes some levels pretty much a breeze, due to the fact that he will bounce off pretty much anything, makes it very hard and annoying to control. And honestly, it just kind of meh. Let's put it this way, there's a reason it's never returned outside of a cameo in one of the collectibles from Kirby's Triple Deluxe. It just sadly was rather awkward. Overall, though, with that exception, the copy abilities of this game are fun and add a level of spice to the gameplay, but are not needed to, say, win a level. In addition to Kirby, there are four unlockable playable characters. Waddle Dee, who is mostly the same as Kirby but has less health, can have copy abilities and is more bouncy. He's just kind of bad, and you unlock him after beating the game with Kirby. Not much of an award, honestly. Luckily, the other three are more interesting. DDD is a big ball, thus is not as nimble, but with 7 HP, it has more health than anyone, and including an upgraded Kirby and a huge hammer that can easily deal with all foes. It can be unlocked after Kirby beats the game, and Meta Knight is the next one, and he has the least health at 3 hit points, but makes up for it for having the greatest speed and a sword slash that is fun to do stuff with. Last but not least, we got Waddle Doo, who is the slowest of the 5, but has a permanent beam ability to make up for it. Usually you gotta beat all the stages with every character before you unlock him, but here's a tip. If you start the game with Nightmare in Dreamland or Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, both of which I've reviewed in the past if you'd like to learn more, and the DS Game Boy Advance slot, you can unlock him immediately. At the end of each stage, you got a goal game where you gotta get enough speed and be sent flying to earn points, extra lives, and such. Rainbow Run is a mode that is sort of a series of challenges where Kirby must achieve certain goals, like beating a stage in a certain amount of time or really having limited rainbow usage. The last are challenges based on certain abilities, though, which are especially fun. Doing this will unlock medals, which are the primary collectible of the game, and I will return to them later towards the end of this video. There are 3 additional modes, but since those are tied directly to the boss fights, I'll wait until then to discuss them in depth. But you do unlock them at a certain point, and you can play them at any point from the menu. Overall, I found the gameplay of this Canvas Curse to be pretty solid, but I have to admit that it is a lot looser than past installments. It's probably for that reason that the level design is a lot more open than before, which does alleviate some of the annoyance you'd expect from loose controls, but also means that levels are more forgettable in terms of their structure than they would be in other installments and would otherwise be. They're also filled with all sorts of devices like grabbers, cup launchers, lanterns, metal balls, pipes, sticky platforms, paint star spinners, stoppers, and touch fans, most of which never returned. I'd also like to mention a mistake I made in my review of Kirby's Amazing Mirror where I didn't mention levers, which were a device that you could activate to permanently remove some obstacles. They're much like the stuff in this game where they're pretty forgettable, and as such I forgot it, my bad. There's also some items like energy drinks that can heal health by a little bit, and Maxim tomatoes that are full heal, as well as 1-ups that give extra lives. There's also a number of hazards like bubbles, balloon bombs, parachute bombs, electric bars, fire bars, gravity orbs, timer bombs, touch spike bars. You know, there's, all sorts of various spiky shutters that all can hurt Kirby. There's also these gray areas where your stylus will be unable to put down rainbow, which can be a bit annoying at points, but still, overall the gameplay is fine, if a bit gimmicky. Now let's go into the presentation and see how that has held up, starting with the most obvious half of presentation, that being the graphics. Alright, so on a basic level, this game uses many of the visual cues first established in Nightmare and Dreamland, but unlike with Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, I think it does a lot more to distinguish itself. First, and most obviously, are the new sprites for the playable characters, but more generally, the art style is very painterly. Readyland, despite the name, has a rather green first level before going into a cubist type city and ending on a level set in a place that is, reddish background, I guess, due to the setting sun. The first world is fine for getting you used to the controls. Orange Gorge doesn't really have a lot of orange outside of the last level set in a freaking active volcano. The others are more grasslands and a haunted, house. Yellow Adventure actually has two of the three levels being yellowish, with one being a ruin and the other a cavern, so that's a step up. The third level is underwater, though, and seems very unusual. Neo Grio, despite the cool name, has three stages with no green at all. You explore a black and white industrial wasteland, a haunted, red wasteland, and a sort of pastel city. Blue Hills has no blue in its levels. First is a sort of old cavern, then there's a more standard underground region, and there's just a bunch of reused themes from past levels. Wonderland Lane is neat though. While yes, the first stage is another frozen wasteland, the second is another black and white industrial region, and the third is a completely unique spectacle in that it is a cubist galaxy. Just all sorts of, really neat background designs. Old Marine Zone is just forgettable, which is why I didn't mention it until now. The final world, the world of Drossia, is a little more than a place to fight the final boss, and yeah, it's pretty creepy with the dark background and disturbing enemy design. Overall, while the graphics are pretty good and they do stand the test of time, I have to say that I think a better job could have been done rendering the worlds more distinctive and in line with the colors their punished names are based on. It just seems kind of slapdash, with many reused concepts that just seem kind of padding at points. Now let's go on to the second half of the presentation that's perhaps not as obvious, the music, and see how that is held up by today's standards. Alright, I think it should be said right off the bat that the vast majority of this game's music are remixes from previous games. A few examples include how Plain level uses Vegetable Valley from Kirby's Adventure, which I've reviewed already in case you'd like to learn more. Then there's Tiny Town that uses the bubbly cloud theme from Kirby's Dreamland. Mad Mechanism's theme is a remix of Studying the Factory theme from Kirby 64 and the Crystal Shards. I'm not going to mention all of the remixes as it would get rather pedantic even for me, but I think most of the remixes sound good except for the boss theme while fighting Krakow, and the remix of the Nightmare final boss theme from Kirby's Adventure is just kind of mediocre. Didi's theme, though, completely makes up for it as it just bangs. It's really good. But the best soundtrack in the game has to be the theme played while fighting Drossia. The first phase has a organal vibe thanks to the 12x8 time signature and usage of G minor, aided by a lengthy intro that really sets the mood of an evil sorceress. The second phase theme is even more chaotic. and it swiftly just transitions into a horrible cacophony of evil that perfectly illustrates the descent into madness that Drossia took. Overall, the soundtrack of this game, while solid with a few bright spots, is a bit forgettable. I didn't comment on any of the menu themes, for example, as they're just kind of there. But for now, let us discuss the many foes that Kirby will encounter on this canvas based adventure. Alright, so starting with the basic copyability list common enemies, you got many returning faces. There's Waddle Dee with varieties that both float on dandelion puffs that function akin to paracells in other games, and some have spears that they will then toss at Kirby, setting the seats for a trope that will return later. Other returning foes include Blipper, the fish, Glunk the anemone, Bouncy, Soror, Squishy, the squid, Gordo, Cappies, Kaboo, Pacto, Shotzo, Bronto Burt, and Como the Spider. In terms of new copyability-less enemies, you got Blado, a relative of Gordo's but with blades that spins around and is completely invulnerable. Flame Shotzo, who looks like a cigarette lighter, will release flames that you gotta work around. Thud is a Thromp type enemy that tries to stomp on Kirby with his mass and comes in three sizes: small, medium, and big. Topper is this four-armed robotic spider thing with a funny face that creates a field of static and can be defeated either by tapping it with the stylus a few times or attacking the body as Kirby, though that can be a bit hard, as you may in fact end up hitting the lightning instead. Gavila is this axolotl looking guy that lunges out at Kirby from holes. Cackling Painting is a really disturbing but harmless enemy that stares and laughs at Kirby. Very creepy. If they bother you, you can kill them by topping with a stylus. Genocide all the weirdos and you get a medal for it for 100% completion. Parasorceress is a little obscure lady that will fly Kirby and freezes him on contact and summoned by Drossia and can only be defeated by tapping them with the stylus, and are kind of annoying during that final boss fight. The last copyability list enemy is Paramatter, which can hurt Kirby on contact and is summoned by Drossia's soul and comes in three devious varieties representing the three primary colors. The red Paramatter turn into fireballs and pursue Kirby, exploding after a little bit. Blue Paramatters turn into ice boulders and fall upon Kirby, raining down upon him like violence. Yellow Paramatters are the most dangerous, as they will shoot out a laser at Kirby. How you defeat them is integral to the final boss, so I'll discuss that a little later. In terms of compatibility bearing common enemies, most are returning faces. You got Waddle Doo that gives Beam, Sparky that gives Spark, Twister that gives Tornado, Chili the Snowman gives Freeze, Bomber gives Crash, Bobo and Flamer give Burning, Bang Bang gives Missile, Needless gives Needle, Wheelie gives Wheel, Tick gives Needle, and Rocky gives Stone. In terms of new foes, there's Snoppy, a little Yeti guy that gives Freeze, and Balloon that gives you, well, Balloon. There are no mini bosses, which is, pretty much a shame, as I think you could easily have done something with them, but instead you got four bosses, three of which are fought twice and act more like mini games than full on bosses. Dee Dee's fight is akin to Gourmet Race, where you have to beat the king in a race. Collecting food makes you speed up, but be careful, as there are enemies like Gordos that can slow you down. Plus, the king will also toss hammers at you after a certain point. I think it's a pretty fun minigame to play, with a fair level of excitement, though admittedly it isn't exactly the most, boss fight of all boss fights. The Krakow fight is a lot like Block Attack, and that's what it's called on the menu. And it's sort of a miniature version of Kirby's Block Ball, but a lot more fun and frantic as you can draw a paddle anywhere. You gotta break through the blocks to reach Krakow as well as defeat all of the other enemies on screen. It can be very erratic and is the most annoying of them in my experience. Each of the three main non-final bosses have three challenge levels, which are only marginally harder, and you can tell that this was done to fill in gaps that would have been taken up by other bosses. As I stated before, there were some that were cut. Paint Panic is a memory game where you gotta paint a painting by connecting the dots that Paint Roller did. Afterwards, there'll be a 4x4 blue square grid that will show up, and you gotta press the right one, which will cause Paint Roller to die. It's a very middling experience, but the same cannot be said for the final boss, Drawwissia. The final boss, and really the only true boss fight in the game, it really does stand out due to being, well, an actual boss fight, and the first form is loaded with all sorts of various complex attacks. Firstly, she will, using her leap attack, leap across one side of the screen to the other rapidly. With her dive attack, she will dive at Kirby after jumping off screen. She can release parasorceresses that will, freeze Kirby on contact or summon an enemy. This enemy can either be a group of Waddle Dees that bear spears, there's blippers, bouncies, caboos, campies, bombs, Sorors, or Bronto Birds. She can also summon needles from the ground that will, go up and try and poke him. And she'll also shoot out these magical electric balls that must be deflected using your stylus, or to make a rainbow line that will then stun her when they get hit back at her, allowing Kirby to attack her. She has a shield that prevents attacks from doing damage otherwise. After taking enough damage, she turns into her second form, a glob of light paint with soulless eyes and a goopy maw of evil. She has a number of attacks that include her teleport spamming, shooting cutters, where she opens up and shoots out evil boomerangs at you. With Bound Pound, she jumps around and tries and pound on Kirby. Splash Rush sees her split into various pieces of paint and rain down on Kirby. Deadly Sun sees her become a giant fireball, which then you gotta maneuver around. Overall, this is a really great fight that, in addition to standing up on its own pretty well and just standing out due to being the only, well, actual attack, it also served as the basis for many future bosses that we will see in this review series. Alright, so you remember those medals mentioned earlier? There are 250 to collect. 65 are hidden inside the stages themselves, 126 are earned via the Rainbow Run Challenge stages. Then you gotta beat all the special courses to get, them as well. Clear the main game with all 5 playable characters, beat all the sub games with an A rank or higher at level 3 difficulty, and reach 1500 or so inches in high jump. Specifically, this one, you got to do it from the menu, as if you do it in the main game, it doesn't really count. I highly suggest using Meta Knight to get the 15,000 inches requirements, as he has a higher speed. But what to do with all these medals, you ask? Well, that is where the medal swap takes center stage. Here you can unlock various things, including life boosts that increase Kirby's max health. Then there are the other playable characters. You got various courses that serve as challenges for specific combat abilities, music and visual options for the rainbow line. These include a zebra, a tropical option, and beads. Woo! If you want my advice, I try to avoid spending medals until you finish the game and have gotten all the medals possible as a lone Kirby, From there, unlock all the special ability courses and life boosts to max out your abilities. as well as get the other playable characters in order to get more medals and unlock Waddle Doo. Then you get all the cosmetic stuff and music last, because while it is neat to have, it's not necessary in order to have an easier time getting, 100% completion. So overall, what are my thoughts? Well, I have to say that this is my favorite spin-off Kirby game that I've reviewed so far. It has, great if a bit loose controls. The story is cool if somewhat utilitarian. The graphics and sound are both pretty solid, and I want to stress I actually enjoyed both, but they are a bit lacking in certain ways that I discussed earlier. The common enemies and mini bosses are just completely pretty lacking, and the bosses outside of DDD and Dracia are just kind of meh. But aside from that, I think that this is a really good game. Not my personal favorite spinoff, one that we review later. I still think that it's a pretty solid game, and I think that you should go out and try and 100% complete it, as that'll give you the most of this game, and it is fun to try and get all those medals. Sadly, there are only two ways to play it. The original DS release, then a re-release for the Wii U Virtual Console, first done on December 3rd, 2015 for the EU, then February 3rd, 2016 in Japan, and October 13th, 2016 in North America. Overall, it can be a bit hard to find, but I think that if you can play it, you will enjoy it greatly. Regardless, I'm the Dark Master, and if you liked this video, liked it, but if you loved it, consider subscribing and sharing it around. Have a good day, and take care, everybody.